Goeiemorgen allemaal, good morning. I think we should start. Thank you very much. So, I hope everyone had a good first day. I certainly had. The high quality presentations and lots of fun even. I mean, I saw cats with a missing middle and I saw Pokemon and games and stuff. So, what are we doing at the institution? That was lovely. But the important thing is to get our keynote going this morning. So it's my absolute honor and privilege to welcome Professor Magda Fourie-Malherbe to us to deliver a keynote. Just something quick. Professor Fourie-Malherbe is Professor of Higher Education Studies in the Center for Higher and Adult Education at our Education faculty. She holds qualifications from University of Free State and Stellenbosch University and has worked for more than 30 years at various public universities in South Africa as in various roles, researcher, lecturer, supervisor, senior manager. Her research includes quite a versatile work on higher education governance, leadership and management, teaching and learning, quality assurance and transformation. And she currently supervises 16 postgraduate students on institutional factors that enhance or inhibit student success. Professor Fourie-Malherbe is a member of the Consortium of Higher Education Researchers, as well as the European Higher Education Society, and also serves on the Council on Higher Education in the Institutional Audits Committee. Authored and co-authored more than 40 scholarly journals, books, and research reports. So, Magda, good luck for this morning. And the title that really piqued my interest was Countering Carelessness, a case for academic leadership as citizenship. So let's welcome our speaker this morning.
Thank you very much, JP, for the introduction. Good morning, everybody. Goeiemorgen. Mulweni, dumelang. Dis regtig vir my 'n groot voorreg om hier te wees vandag. So thank you very much for the invitation and thanks for being here. I must admit that I also had a wonderful day yesterday listening to a host of very interesting presentations. So I would like to congratulate all the presenters at this year's SoTL conference with the quality of work that you're doing and the very interesting presentations that you're offering here. Of course, I am also very honored to be following on Professor Kathleen Quinlan's keynote yesterday. I've been familiar with Kathleen's work for a number of years, and I had the pleasure of meeting her when we had a Skype discussion a few weeks ago when we discussed our respective keynote presentations. And I was actually amazed to see how they resonated with each other. So I think you will find that many of the themes that Kathleen discussed yesterday will be coming back in my presentation today, where Kathleen focused more on leadership for learning specifically. I would like today to look at a broader context, the context in which we work as academics, as lecturers, as researchers, as academic support staff, and what effect that context, that institutional context, has on us and how we respond to it and how we might respond to it. So let's then look at a quick overview of what I will be discussing. As I explained now, my focus will be on the context in which we work. So if we want to talk about a conceptual framework for my presentation, I would say it is the contextual theory of leadership, where I acknowledge that all of us have different leadership traits, and because of that, different leadership styles. And of course, I subscribe to Kathleen's definition of what a leader is, in the sense that everybody sitting here is a leader. We must really all see ourselves as leader in a variety of contexts in which we operate every day. So even though we have specific leadership traits or characteristics or styles because of our natural inclination, how we give effect to our leadership will very often be shaped by the context in which we find ourselves. And that is an internal context in terms of the department or division where we work and the colleagues with whom we interact, the students with whom we interact. But it's also an external context of the bigger university, a higher education system in a country, and even an international higher education system. So that is the theoretical framework from which I am departing. So within that, I would like to look at the context and ask a question whether we can talk about our institutions as being toxic. And should we go that far? And then what are the forces leading to our institutions becoming toxic or becoming careless, as I explained in my title? Ask the question then, so have we really become careless institutions? Why could we think of our institutions in that way? I will also be looking at experiences of positional academic leaders in a so-called careless institution, and then look, the most important part of my presentation, at how can we become a different or a new university through distributed leadership, an ethic of care, and academic citizenship. Now, I think those of you might have heard other presentations of mine. I'm thinking back of when I did a theology at ENL's invitation, and the teaching learning seminar earlier this year. We'll hear many of the themes coming back, although I am focusing more on academic citizenship today. Now, 2018 is in many respects an interesting year because we celebrate at Stellenbosch University our centenary. And my faculty of education, is also 100 years old this year. It was one of the first 4 faculties established at the institution. So there is much to celebrate this year. But it has also been a year of loss and bereavement. And I think we were all very shocked and saddened to hear about the passing of our dear Brenda Leibovitz, who had a big influence on many of us here today, on our lives. When she passed away on 26 April, I think that was for us a shock and a deep loss that we experienced. But we also, I think the higher education system was shocked by the passing of Professor Bongani Manyosi on 27 July 2018 from the University of Cape Town, one of our sister institutions. And quite a lot has been written about Professor Mayosi's passing and the tragic way in which he took his own life. And I think many questions arising in terms of what happens in the life of such a brilliant and talented young academic that leads to this end of a life that had so much potential. And in a journal article that appeared very recently in the South African Journal of Higher Education, Beverly Thaver and her husband wrote some reflections on the passing of Professor Bongani Mayosi, and they call it Universities and the Burden of History. And they argue that it is the universities, its fundamental fault and flaw of the university is this. It placed the burden of history on Professor Mayosi and offered him inadequate support. He had to carry the burden of history that was not of his own making. He had to interface the very forces that challenged the status quo, which he, as his scientific work suggests, was inclined to support. The real tragedy is the failure of the university to accept its own burden of history And this is the pathos which carries the name of Professor Bongani Mayosi. So the argument that they are making, which actually resonated in many of the other articles that I read after his passing, was that there was a lack of institutional support. Professor Mayosi asked to step down as dean twice in his career, and the institution didn't allow him to step down. He had a very hard time during the Fees Must Fall campaign at the institution, and seemingly all of this simply became too much to bear. Lydia Cairncross in a Daily Maverick wrote the following: "What kind of conditions within an institution makes it necessary that we place our best and brightest into these crucibles of intense pressure at the interface of power, because there is a need to struggle on all fronts, including within the corridors of power." So that was her perceptions after Professor Mayosi's death. But I think we were not shocked only about his untimely death, but also about the tragic death of Katlego Monareng, a student of the Tshwane University of Technology, who was killed by police in a protest situation. And then, of course, I think we heard throughout the year about rape cultures on campuses, and also students going hungry. So it is really about very, very basic needs of people on our campuses, our students, our staff. Needs for understanding, need for support, need for food even, need for safety, and need for care. If I can put it all together, a need for care that for me speaks from all of these news reports that we read every day. So that is why I asked the question then, can we see this as a toxic university? And to come back to the article by Thaver and Thaver, they said this is the elephant in the room, the toxic cultures that pervade our institutions and are responsible for the human, social, and cultural fallout for which we continue to pay for in social alienation. And about a year ago, I came across this book by John Smythe, The Toxic University, where he discusses what he calls zombie leadership, academic rock stars, and neoliberal ideology. So that brings me then to the context in which we operate, in which we work every day as academics, researchers, supervisors, academic developers. And we find ourselves here within this broader context of an institution, national society and higher education system, and an international society. What I'd like to point out now are the different forces or pressures in each of these contexts, which I think influence what we do and how we experience our institutions. First of all, if we look at the international context, and I'm sorry, I need to refer to my notes now. We all know we live in an era of globalization, and this age of globalization really began on the day that the experts say the Berlin Wall came down. From that moment in 1989, the trends evident in the late 1970s already and throughout the 1980s accelerated. So what were these trends? The free movement of capital, people, and goods, trickle-down economics, a much diminished role for nation states, and the belief that market forces now unleashed were unstoppable. So globalization is then a process by which national and regional economies, societies, and cultures have become integrated into the global network of trade, communication, immigration, and transportation. And more recently, the term globalization has been expanded to include a broader range of areas and activities such as culture, media, technology, social, cultural, political, and even biological factors like climate change. So I think we all listen to the news, hear about these trends that I just mentioned. Now, if we say that is the context of globalization, neoliberalism is a particular element of globalization, constituting the form through which domestic and global economic relations are structured. So neoliberalism became the new common sense. It replaces the logic of exchange with that of competition and advances a new anthropology, Homo economicus, the individual as an enterprising and competitive entrepreneur. Monbiot, in a 2016 publication, says, inequality is recast as virtuous, a reward for utility and a generator of wealth. Efforts to create a more equal society, according to neoliberalism, are both counterproductive and morally corrosive. Now, the term neoliberalism was coined in 1938 at a meeting in Paris, and neoliberal ideas began to enter the mainstream in the 1970s, particularly after Reagan and Thatcher took power. And some of the effects of that were massive tax cuts for the rich, the crushing of trade unions, which Margaret Thatcher is famous for, deregulation, privatization, outsourcing, and competition in public services. Margaret Thatcher is also famous for her saying that there is no society, there are only individuals. Now, through the IMF, the World Bank, the Maastricht Treaty, and the World Trade Organization, neoliberal policies were imposed on much of the world. And at national level, the ideology of neoliberalism is manifested as new public management. Now, we can look at new public management and its effects on higher education in the following ways. If we look at the introduction of market-type mechanisms and competition, we just need to think about the increased importance of international rankings for higher education institutions. If we look at the commodification of services, which is one of the features of new public management, we can just think of how we start seeing higher education as a commodity. For example, in 2016, international education, higher education, was Australia's third largest export, just behind iron ore and coal. That is the way that higher education can be seen as a commodity. There's a focus on value for money, return on investment, doing more with less, and we see that in the decline of public funding for higher education. There's an adoption of an entrepreneurial culture. At universities, we are being pressured for growth in third stream income, fourth stream income, fifth stream income. There's new public management promotes central regulation and control, and we find that in the increasing accountability requirements of universities. There's a shift of priorities from universalism to individualism. So we ask the question, can we still see higher education as a public good or simply a private good? And then, of course, taking it further down to what we do, the effect on our work as academics, it has an effect of deprofessionalization because it deconstructs the space in which our professional autonomy is exercised. There's a shift from collegial or democratic governance in flat structures to hierarchical models based on dictated management specifications of job performance. When academic restructuring initiatives are implemented, it is done more in terms of financial stringencies than academic requirements. There's increasing specifications by management over workloads, programs, academic structures, and an erosion of the traditional conception of professional autonomy over work, both in terms of our teaching and research. Now, earlier this year, Sue McKenna from Rhodes University wrote an interesting opinion piece in The Conversation, where she said there are 5 signs that universities are turning into corporations. First of all, new executive positions and salaries. Secondly, appointments, not elections. The decisions and policies that are taken, the regulatory frameworks that we have to abide to, and the notion to do quick fixes rather than looking more broadly at what an academic institution is all about. So we must admit then that the influence of neoliberalism from the international scene has an effect also on our national system, with new public management then becoming the order of the day. But what happens then at the institutional level? All of this then means that at institutional level, a managerialist approach is adopted. So a more business-like approach, more private sector practices, the establishment or entrenchment of a management culture through, for example, strategic planning, objective setting, etc. We just need to listen at the management speak at Stellenbosch University to understand this. We no longer have a division for institutional research and planning. We have a division for business intelligence. We very often talk about, or we hear talk about, return on investment. I don't know how you measure the return on investment of student support services, for example. Our departments are seen as cost centers. There's also, because of this, a greater separation of academic work and management. So there's an alienation of academics from the management of the institution, because there's more control and regulation of academic work by managers. We all, I think, suffer from the effects of performance management, because we have certain targets that we must meet. So it is important how many articles we publish every year, how many postgraduate students we deliver, and not really what the quality of those articles are, how they promote our discipline, or what the quality of our postgraduate students' research is. There's a weakening of the professional status of academics, and an ethos of enterprise, emphasis on income generation, stronger market orientation, increased competition for resources. If we look at the budget system at Stellenbosch University, there's a competition between the faculties, and our faculty, for example, that is currently undergoing a so-called optimization process, needs to hear all the time that you have to be cross-subsidized because you are actually not financially viable, even though on indicators around number of student-lecturer ratio, research output, and postgraduate output, we are certainly not at the bottom of the ladder. Internally in the faculty, there's a look at the different departments and saying, this department is in the red and has to be cross-subsidized by the other department that is in the blue. So it actually becomes quite ludicrous to understand our academic work in these ways. A South African study by Webster and Muswetsa done in 2001 differentiated a number of responses to managerialist approaches from academics. They said there's a reconfigured relationship with management. They become employees rather than colleagues. There's an increase in the intensity of work. And I'll give you some examples just now. There's a loss of shared identity, a loss of a sense of community, feelings of powerlessness, and an increase in emotional labor. And they conclude as follows. They say, we have suggested that academics face a demand overload. Faced by these demands, many have become deeply pessimistic about their future in the academic workplace. Some are attempting to exit either by leaving the university for the private or public sector or by moving into managerial jobs in the university or full-time research posts. This is an avoidance mechanism and not a solution to the demands facing academics at the chalk face. However, we've also identified a small group who have responded to these demands in innovative ways. The difficulty is ensuring that these activities strengthen what Clark refers to as the academic heartland. The challenge is to fuse managerial imperatives with academic priorities. So, our institutional context. There's also the institutional context of transformation that plays out at the individual lecturer level, at the program level, at the module level, in, for example, the debate around decolonization of the curriculum. But we also have the pressures of a new generation of students, Generation Z, and new forms of teaching and learning that particularly responds to the development of technology. So we see a host of pressures on us as academics, as people working in higher education. And that is why I come to the conclusion that maybe we are working in careless institutions. In an article by Kathleen Lynch, she wrote about carelessness, a hidden doxa of higher education. And she explains carelessness as the way in which people who want to advance in higher education cannot do so when they have caring responsibilities. And she referred particularly to caring responsibilities in their private lives at home. But she makes a number of salient points. She says, for example, that the highly individualized entrepreneurialism that is at the heart of the new academy has allowed a particular careless form of competitive individualism to flourish. What she is saying is that it's not something new, but it has now become the new normal, this competition. And then that leads to a deep disrespect for the relationally engaged, caring citizen. So competitive individualism is no longer seen as an amoral necessity, rather it is seen as a desirable and necessary attribute for a constantly reinventing entrepreneur. Recently, earlier in this year, a survey was done amongst HODs at Stellenbosch University. And Dr. Margaret Orr kindly shared the report with me. And when I went through the results of that survey, I picked up so many of these issues that I found in Kathleen Lynch's article that points to Stellenbosch University becoming a careless institution. Let's look at what some HODs said. One of the questions were, How confident do you feel in your capacity to manage each of these tasks, your leadership tasks? Remember, we are now talking about positional leaders, positional academic leaders. And one of the responses said, none of these items are overly challenging, but it is the sheer volume and tyranny of small and big things that interfere with capacity. The person then lists a number of these things that causes this tyranny, and ends off by saying, I do not recall a Christmas break in the past 5 years without at least 3 to 4 dissertations to read. So the intrusion into personal time, private lives, family time. Does that point to a caring institution? I don't think so. Another question was, which of the following forms of support have you used carrying out your role of head of department? How useful have you found them? This response is about training that doesn't give you resources. In the end, it's all about money. Some of these support to heads contribute to our workload and stress. Thus, the university typically starts to play a new liberal managerial game. For instance, rather give me the money for research and promotions you are spending on employee wellness. Because what the university is actually saying is, we do not have money to promote you, which may be long overdue, but come work with us in the park as a wellness activity and you will be okay. A question on what is the best part of being a head of department. What do you find fulfilling? This really gave me hope that we can bring back the care in our institutions. This respondent said, I like the fact that I have agency to support my staff and try to make their working experience better. I like the fact that I could maybe influence institutional culture and make my department a kinder place. But at this stage, feeling tired and overwhelmed and suffering from decision fatigue, the small pay bump feels like the best thing. But that is so important. Being able to make our departments kinder places, making our working experiences better. And the worst part of being a head, it's difficult to manage colleagues' deep dissatisfaction at being a cog in the crushing wheel, reduced to research outputs and supervision throughputs and teaching input subsidy, all to balance the books. Last sentence, I'm by nature a healthy skeptic, but even this can go septic when one has to filter colleagues' understandable toxicity towards the institution. So we see a lot of comments, and of course there are also positive comments. Let me immediately acknowledge that. I went through the report. There's quantitative and qualitative data, and there are many positives in the report, things that HODs expressed their appreciation for. But I was concerned with these kinds of comments, and they were not the only ones. So now we're all in doom and gloom. But Ronald Barnett, in his 2018 publication, The Ecological University of Feasible Utopia, says, the doomongers are wrong. The university as an institution may be severely damaged, but it's not in ruins. The entrepreneurial university is not the end point of the evolution of the university, being a mere stage in its history. Spaces are already opening up for a new kind of university. What he calls the ecological university is presenting itself, etc., etc., also from within the university itself. So from within the university, we can create a new kind of institution. But what would that then take from us as academic leaders? How can our role be in this new university? Barnett goes on to say that this would amount to a new concept of leadership, not just handling complexity, but foraging for possibilities in the university's total ecological terrain, of bringing those possibilities into view and marshalling the university's resources in realizing them. This, of course, points to distributed leadership, such capabilities being developed throughout the university. And that then brings me to my next point around distributed leadership and academic leadership as service. What is important for us is to stop seeing leadership as positions or power, but see it as an activity. So it is not a status, but it is about deliberative social service. And I think, in my mind, if I need to define academic leadership as service, I think it needs at least 3 essential components: distributed leadership, an ethics of care, and academic citizenship. Now, some of you might have heard me speak about distributed leadership previously, and Kathleen also referred to distributed leadership yesterday, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. But I think to understand distributed or distributive leadership, for me, that middle sentence is the crux of the matter. It means generating ideas together, seeking to reflect upon and make sense of work in the light of shared beliefs and new information, and creating actions that grow out of these new understandings. So distributed leadership promotes a view of leadership as less the property of individuals, but more the contextualized outcome of interactive causal processes. So the activity is distributed over or stretched over multiple people. Leadership is spread throughout the organization. It is not about the agency and power of individuals, but structurally conjoint agency, concerted actions performed by pluralities of interdependent organization members. And concerted action is more than the numerical or additive action, which represents the aggregated effect of a number of individuals. It is actually about an additional dynamic, which is the product of conjoint activity, meaning that the outcome is a product that is greater than the sum of their individual actions. Now, many of the colleagues in the room are part with me of the Academic Leadership Focused Interest Group. We are a group of staff members of the institution who are interested in academic leadership. We meet about once every 5 weeks over lunchtime, and we study literature on academic leadership, we discuss it, and we share thoughts. We also sometimes we get presenters to talk to us about their notions of academic leadership, we engage with them, etc. So if anybody, here's an advert, if anybody's interested in joining, please just ask Claudia to put your name on the address list and you'll get an invitation to our next meeting. But from this focused interest group, we developed 2 research projects. And the one is about trying to ascertain what the current conditions for distributed leadership are at a departmental or faculty level. And we had a department and a faculty volunteering to participate in the research project. We've just done the first round of data collection, which comprised of a survey to all the staff in the relevant department and faculty. And we haven't had time to analyze the quantitative data, but I just went through the qualitative responses. So what we asked the respondents were, to what extent are the cultures and the processes that are significant in distributed leadership present in your current department and how it functions, or your faculty and how it functions. And I'd like to share some of the responses with you. Next year at SoTL, we will present the results of our study. So this is just preliminary. The one response was, because distributed leadership is not consciously or not at all pursued from top management down, both faculty and individual departments are limited when it comes to influencing decision-making and policy. So that comment immediately says something about the institutional context required for distributed leadership to flourish. Another respondent said, the department has always been a well-functioning unit where mostly mutual respect reigns and every individual contributes according to their expertise. If the criteria is pursued consciously, improvement is still possible. But there is a lack of resources and professional support exacerbated by the chronic lack of time overload. So that points to other institutional conditions inhibiting distributed leadership in the department. Two more comments from a faculty. This is a noble cause and ideal, in other words, distributed leadership. It also correlates to the new strategic framework of Stellenbosch University. Enablers are also identified in the new and future university. As indicated in the previous section, this is not yet present or operational or supported formally. It is happening in some instances, but the prevailing ethos remains individual excellence and performance over collective collaborative endeavors. And lastly, another comment from a respondent in the same faculty. We have something of a culture of distributed leadership in the faculty. However, I fear it is under threat. The pressures of transformation and the conflicts in certain areas of the faculty have created a climate of distrust, identity politics, and caucus groups that make decisions that are then brought into meetings to be ratified. This may just be a perception, but I am concerned that we are moving away from the sense of community and shared values that inform leadership styles in the faculty. So we see there some threats around transformation occurring, threats to distributed leadership occurring in this faculty. Second element that I think is important as academic leadership as service is an ethics of care. And I see I need to very soon finish off. Now, I think if you can read Nicoline Herman's excellent PhD around an ethics of care. It can be defined as a moral reasoning that derives from a concern for others, a desire to maintain thoughtful mutual relations with those affected by one's actions. Now, I think if we read that definition of an ethics of care, it's very important to understand it's not only about our colleagues, but it's also an ethics of care towards our students. Because a concern for our students, desire to maintain thoughtful relationships with them should be uppermost in our minds. So it is about care for growth and development, a focus on acceptance of the other, both in his or her current state and as one capable of growth. And that capability for growth is embedded in all of us. So that is about caring for your colleague so that they can grow and develop, but certainly also our students. It's also about the care for self. So responsiveness to another's needs, but caring for oneself in a nurturing rather than a self-maximizing way. And lastly, Joan Tronto, with her very well-known political ethics of care theory. She says, and she refers to caring in a democracy. The key to living well for all people is to live a care-filled life. A life in which one is well cared for by others when one needs it. A life in which one cares well for oneself and also has the room to provide for the caring for other people, animals, institutions, ideals, that gives one's life its particular meaning. Lastly, academic citizenship. So we can also address academic leadership as citizenship. Then we start from the established values of collegiality and academic autonomy, and we must then analyze leadership as a social process. Why is academic citizenship important? I think Thompson, Constantino, and Fallis, we must heed their warning. The future vitality of universities will likely depend on successfully characterizing citizenship in our institutions. Bruce McFarlane did a study in the United Kingdom, United States, Canada, and Australia. We asked lecturers what their perceptions were of academic citizenship. And they said things like, it's about belonging to a group, a learning community, and that community has a set of values, rules, and objectives, and also contributing to the development of one's areas of knowledge, in other words, our disciplines, and being supportive of others in the same. He then identified 3 elements of academic leadership: political literacy, which is about participating in decision-making processes at all levels; community involvement within your unit, department, faculty, but also your discipline, local community, government, wider society; and then importantly, your social and moral responsibility, nurturing students, supporting colleagues, developing and defending knowledge, communicating with the public. So I think you hear many of the things that I already said in distributed leadership and in ethics of care coming back now in these elements of academic citizenship. What are the implications of academic citizenship? It means we have to stay up to date. We have to support our students, support the organization, share expertise in the wider sense within and outside the university. Being supportive of our students, colleagues, and stakeholders. And I really like this last one. It means doing your bit as an academic. So it means, how do we conceptualize our role as academics? And that role is not just about teaching, supervising, researching, assessing, being involved in community interaction. It also means that we play our role within our organization and serve on the committees, prepare for committee meetings, say our say in committee meetings, be informed, be involved. Because if we don't do that, we are lucky at Stellenbosch University, we still have a very strong committee structure through which decisions are taken. But it depends on our participation in those committee structures, how good the decisions that are taken eventually will be. That is our responsibility. So we need to be informed, we need to find our voices at the institutional level and the faculty level where we are participating in these structures. So John Daniel Kenny said, academic leaders are needed at all levels to restore some balance in the power structures in higher education and to facilitate the contribution of academics to effective policy and strategy. Their role would include protection of the integrity of academic work against the excesses of efficiency-driven reforms. And then he conceptualizes this as a 5th scholarship. So, What I'm trying to say then is, if we distribute leadership, if we practice an ethics of care, if we take serious our role as academic citizens, maybe we, all of us together, can counter carelessness in our institutions. It will mean that every single one of us who are convinced about this will play our role. And Margaret Mead said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, concerned citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." Thank you very much. Bye, dankie.
Magda, thank you very, very much. I mean, there's such a depth and so many things. I've written a few pages of what I'm taking out of it. Sensitizing, but also a call to action, and also giving hope through a framework. But we actually have ample time, since the next section only starts at 1:45. So if anybody's worried about time, I was trying to tell you 10 minutes left.
I saw.
I thought you said no, stop.
No.
So please, if I can open the floor for responses and questions. Gert, and is there another colleague? And Karen will then bring the mic to you, if you could indicate. So who's going to go first? At the back there, and at the back.
Hello, Magda. Thank you very much for a very inspiring but also somewhat heartbreaking presentation. I have a bit of a challenge. I really enjoyed the presentation, and I shed a bit of a tear with Brenda's picture that took me by surprise. I have a bit of a challenge for you. Something that I picked up, and it's not entirely academic, but maybe it also is the invitation to academics to join you over lunchtime when you are talking about being caring. And I'm wondering, is this kind of research not part of, what academics are supposed to be doing? And I recently read an article, and I forget by whom, but I will send it on to you, about why it is important to actually take your lunchtime, take your lunch break. Use your lunch break for lunch and for having conversations outside of what your job is. I know all of us, I don't know one person here who doesn't work through lunch each and every day, and it's not healthy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. I agree with you 100%. I think we read the same article, because I also read it and I thought, yes, this is so important. And I mean, I find it myself, if I just stay at my desk and keep on working, I'm certainly not as productive in the afternoon than when I go out and walk outside in our beautiful town. So yes, I agree. Maybe we should think of another time for the academic leadership FIG to meet. We just did it because we found that's the time that people are available, and it's once in every 5 weeks. So, but we take your point. Thank you very much.
Magda, thank you for that presentation. I also enjoyed it very much. And one of the comments you made was this pressure to publish, which we all feel so acutely. And of course, the institution is part of that. But I'm more and more concerned about the publishing edifice that exists. And I think Elsevier is now making something in the region of £900 million in revenue, or something like that. Staggering profit margins, and of course we review endlessly and we edit and we earn nothing. And I keep wondering, how do we take leadership in what I perceive to be a very careless world in publishing? How do we take leadership in putting our research out differently? How do we not have to be subject to this created phenomenon of the modern publishing creation? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Thank you very much. Yes, that is certainly something that concerns all of us. In that respect, what really concerns me is the fact that so much good work is being done by our postgraduate students also. which simply does not appear in the public domain because they have such bad experiences from trying to publish in academic journals. So there's a few things that I think we could try to counter that. The one is publishing open access more and more, because I think there's a total monopoly in terms of academic publications around a few big publishing houses. And if we go open access more and more, that I think it will counter that monopoly. Secondly, we're starting to look more and more at the option of putting books together, where we have more say of who will be part of the book, what the book will look like, etc., etc. And at the center, we've been very lucky to have a close working relationship with African Sun Media, who regularly publishes books in the Research on Higher Education series. Thirdly, I think we need to support young academics and guide them to, those of us who are well published, help them to play the game. I don't see that as academics we really have the power to make huge changes in terms of the current situation of academic publishing. But if we can at least support and care for young academics and postgraduate students to get published, we will get those voices heard as well, which I think is the most important thing. Somebody said the other day, it is actually morally unacceptable that research is not published because it costs a lot of money. You had research participants, so they deserve to have the study published, and often it's so difficult. So I think there's various other options through book chapters, through open access, and then the support of young or academics or postgraduate students.
Good morning, Prof. It's Anita. I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Hi, Anita.
How are you?
Very well, thanks.
Thank you. I just want to move the conversation a little bit in terms towards women. And women as academics, women in triple jeopardy, women having so many responsibilities of being a mother, a woman, an academic, and in our cases, of course, a professional as well. And many of the three great points you mentioned fit very well within a woman's ethic of care. But I think that is also exploited, and we suffer sometimes in terms of that. Could you maybe share your views on how women can survive? Thank you.
Well, maybe I should first share my views on how I agree with you that we certainly often suffer, because somehow it is just assumed that the female staff in a department will be those who support students and who have the open door policy for students and so on. I know I'm overgeneralizing. I apologize to my male colleagues. Many of them are also very nurturing and caring. But there is still a gendered effect in academia. How do we cope with that? I'm not sure, you know, after 30 years, I don't think I've got the recipe right yet. It was always putting in just simply more hours in a day to balance all the responsibilities of work, home, family, children, etc. But I said to myself, you know what? If this doesn't kill you, it'll make you stronger. And I think I wouldn't change anything for the world You know, being more involved with those who need us enriches our lives to such an extent that actually I don't want that to change. So being there for my students, being there for colleagues is important for me, and even though it might mean that I put in longer hours, you know, I take that with a job. So I think it is about the resilience of females in academia that we must draw from, and that we must not look towards other colleagues who might not play that caring and nurturing role and emulate ourselves on them, but say, well, I have my role to play. These are my strengths. This is what I can do, and this is the difference that I will make and keep on making. I'm sorry, it's not really an answer, but as I said, I don't have the answer.
Hi. Morning, thank you for a very inspiring talk. I have maybe asking advice or question. As a young academic, and I'm thinking specifically where you said, you know, you have 3 theses over December, it's holiday time, we all have small kids, family life, etc. And I'm wondering why. And for me, that still have a few years, you know, in the academia, is it because as an academic, we all have this trait that we want to professionally develop, be better, build our CV? Is that the reason why? Is it because we have pressure from above? Is it because that we just don't have the guts to say no, being labeled as being difficult or lazy or, you know, doing the minimum? Why does it keep on happening? Why is it okay if we just say no? It's my time, leave me alone.
Well, I think you mentioned a number of reasons, then I think it's all of them, really. It is about wanting to advance in your career. It is about pressure from above. And sometimes it is about not being able to say no. What bothers me about this is that what is expected from us, I think that is where the problem lies. So being pressurized all the time to deliver more. And every time I put the emphasis on the more, not the better. That is what bothers me. It is not, I don't think academia should be about delivering more outputs all the time, getting better return on investment. I think academia should be about the quality of work that we do, the time and effort we put into our students to nurture them to become the young people that we want to send out into our society. The quality of the research work that we do and how we advance our disciplines, and not the number of articles that we write. So I think in effect, there are huge flaws in our performance management system. And that will be one of the places where we can really start making a difference in our institution as a whole. But I think we must also admit that the performance management system, although it is prescribed by the institution, is also applied at a very local level, departmental level. And maybe that is where we can start making the difference.
Sorry, but I just want to make the comment that there's one particular reason for that. There is a deadline of 1 January for handing in master's theses where you only have 2 years to get that thing done for the March graduation ceremony. That's inevitable that you are going to spend your Christmas holidays on reading master's theses. Yeah. So there are some of these things that if it could be shifted by a month, even 2 weeks, we could maybe have a December holiday. And I think these things need to be voiced and need to be looked at.
No, absolutely. I think the kind of little boxes that we are pushed into. And my colleague Runel Carelessness has this lovely saying that, okay, we are now all back in our rabbit holes again. That is the effect of it. We just go into our offices, we close the door because we have so much work to do. Administration, preparation for lectures, research, articles to be written, supervision, that we don't want to see our colleagues. We don't want to enter into a conversation because I don't have time for that. And I think that really weakens what academia is all about. We need that intellectual and social engagement with one another. We need to be stimulated by our colleagues and to nurture one another. And we lose all of that.
Thank you very much, Professor. That was a very interesting talk. This has got maybe something to do with confirmation bias, but I've been thinking about, I'm in a professional degree, actuarial science, and I've been thinking about the problem with a degree to some extent is that we don't think about knowledge, we don't think about how to develop it, and I wonder if the university is partly responsible for this in developing all of these professional degrees, and we've lost, I've never kind of been challenged with what is it to develop knowledge, what is an academic, what, you know, all that type of thing. So a lot of us kind of grow up without thinking about any of these things. And so to some extent it feels to me like the university is responsible for this professionalization ourselves.
Thank you, that's a very interesting point. And I want to link that to something else that I didn't mention, but which is very prevalent currently in higher education literature, and that is about graduate employability and the kind of graduate that we deliver for a knowledge economy, for the workplace. And I am not saying that we should train people for unemployment, not at all, not in the current situation in South Africa. But what I'm saying is that employable graduates are good and well, but that's not the only thing that we should be doing. We should nurture students to become active, critical citizens of a young democracy, play their roles in their families, community, society, ethical roles, leadership roles. So this professionalization of our academic programs will, yes, probably lead to employability, but the question is, will it do all the other things? And I think that is the danger.
It's on, right. Magda, it's wonderful. I think we probably could talk the whole day still, and you know, sort of, we know where you live, so we'll come and get you. Just from my side, I thought what to say in closing, and I think from my own little bit of research and some of the respondents on leadership, the one theme that came out was, I see myself as a leader, I'm asking the difficult questions, I'm the devil's advocate, I take that pressure. And I think we all saw today also the honesty and what you have put before us as a leader, and I think that's also kind of a care. So by asking difficult questions and by engaging us and also giving us a bit of hope, I think I experience that you do care deeply for me and for all of us and for the institution. So I think everyone will agree, and I ask us all to thank Magda again with a round of applause. Thank you very much.